I think it's a very, very important occasion because 41 years later, the lessons of the emergency remain very, very relevant. In fact, they've got fresh, contemporary news value because once again, we are looking at people talking about an undeclared emergency. And I think that is one thing why this book needs to be read, because we cannot afford to forget the lessons of the emergency. And the lessons of the emergency is that if you allow one leader, one party to dominate and have their own political agenda rammed through, it is going to be difficult. It is going to be difficult for Indian democracy to survive, and that is why I think we forget the lessons of the emergency at our own peril.
As Ajoy pointed out, I'm John. And those of you who have bought the book, at the back cover is a picture of the two of us writing the book. I had long curly hair, jet black, and a curly beard. Ajoy had a boyish face. He retains his boyish face. I have lost the curls and the hair. Mercy, my wife, was the one who used to give us coffee and tea as required. But before I have my 3 minutes, to the many that we missed today, I also pay tribute to Edith Narayanan, my editor, whose words should really be the words for every journalist. Ajoy and I were working with the Patriot and the Link, and Edith told me, I want a Patriot reporter in police headquarters. I do not want a police reporter in Patriot headquarters. I leave it to the newer generations of journalists to paraphrase. It's my privilege to recognize several heroes of the emergency who are here. Raj is here, better known in the emergency for creating a ruckus. I've asked you to keep cool, which he has promised. Laila Kabir is here. She, with a little baby, fled Delhi, India, to the US, and from there mounted a long, sharp, and very effective campaign against the emergency. And there were many such people. Ajoy has told you this is a documentation of what life means under tyranny when there is no constitution. Yesterday, Harsh Mandara there and I were in a village in Pilakwa in Uttar Pradesh, in a field, and we turned a sod of earth which had a large stain of blood. That's all that remains of Qasim, Muhammad Qasim, lynched. There are several other remains of his there, his chapel, possibly other bits of his DNA. The police has not bothered to investigate. The police never will, because they were complicit. Whether because they don't want to lose their job, and who wants to lose a government job for which you are paid 20 lakhs and hope to retrieve 20 times more, or whether they actually believe. And there is circumstantial evidence that in Uttar Pradesh and many parts of the country, for 2 years now approximately, Harsh and I have been roaming as Karwai Mohabbat, visiting every house which has lost a brother, a son, a father, an uncle to lynch mobs. There is a story of fear that stalks the land. Self-invited fear, perhaps, maybe it doesn't exist, but it's very palpable. And as Ajoy said, the book made his career. It ruined my career, because I never was an unbiased, neutral journalist. I was always biased. But after this, and all that we saw in the 40 years of journalism, the impact of policy at the grassroots, whether it's a queue for changing notes, or it is sterilization in Chhattisgarh now, or any of the other things that are mentioned here, or the role of people, politics, parties in communal violence. Over the 40 years, I've forgotten how many. You've seen it before, the people who have recognized that. The lack and the delay in justice, there never seems to be any justice. And that is what is needed here, and I hope Fali will shed some more light, because even there were famous judgments of magistrates and judges upholding the application of responsibility, upholding the, what should I call it, the vasectomy of the Constitution of India. How do we fight it is a question we ask our three panelists. As for us, work is never done. There are hopefully more books from where this came from, new books, because documentation is never complete, and documentation needs to be put in. Even this huge internet, you can only draw from it what others have put in it. No more, no less. And therefore, the need for constant documentation. There are very few documents of the emergency left. I have a sack full. Hopefully elsewhere there are. There's need for deeper research into how structures crumble when there's actual pressure and when they think that there's pressure. The difference between the two is subtle but well marked. Thank you.
Now I ask Mark Tully to make his comments.
Thank you very much, Ajoy and John, for asking me to be present. When Ajoy asked me to write the introduction, I was not the first choice. Fali was the first choice, and he would have probably done a much better job. But he was unwell at that time, but he's back in great shape now. I remember the emergency for personal reasons, of course, as well as many others. I was a victim of the emergency, as they say, because I was expelled under the censorship rules for refusing to accept censorship. But if I can be personal for a moment, you know, there's no such thing really as a totally bad event. Because what happened was, as soon as I got back, I said to the BBC, well, you'll have to send me back again when we can get back, because otherwise people will say I was expelled for doing something very bad, which I was not. And fortunately, I conned the BBC into sending me back again on those grounds. And thereafter, they rather gave up the struggle to get rid of me. And here I am still partly a beneficiary, partly a victim of the emergency. Well, what I want to talk about very briefly today is what I think is the fundamental cause of the emergency, in my view, was the collapse of the institutions of India. At the time, none of the institutions put up a fight against all the total illegalities which took place in the emergency. The whole thing was illegal, if you think about it. And from the Congress Party, from the administration, from the courts themselves, from the president, of course, who was guilty of an illegal act in signing the emergency declaration, I would say that all the many acts were unconstitutional and illegal. But no fight was put up against them by the institutions. And I believe that this weakness of the institutions is still a fundamental problem in India. And when, as Ajoy said, I commented that I wasn't certain that any longer that another emergency was possible, what I was trying to say and what I mean was because I still believe that the institutions in India are more fragile than they should be for the safety of the country. And I'm not alone in believing that. And in Vora, the governor of Kashmir, wrote a book 2 or 3 years ago in which the main thesis of the book was, as I think he put it, that the fragility of the institutions are a threat to the national security of India. And what is going to prevent, as Ajoy talked about, a strong politician coming forward, having total power over his own party, and deciding to exercise that power in a different way, whether as the president or whatever else he decides to do it, but in so doing, undermining democratic freedoms, and again, as Ajoy said, most importantly, taking away civil rights, civil liberties, and generally, as I say, undermining India's democratic tradition. The only thing which can prevent that is if the institutions of India say, we will not tolerate this. We have a constitution which was given to the people of India, and that is the Constitution of India, which was decided by the fathers of the nation at the time of independence, and that will remain the Constitution. If the institutions stand up and say that, then democracy in this country is assured. But are we certain now that institutions will not once again fail India, as I believe they did in the emergency? But having said that, I want to make 2 points, slightly in contrast to that. I do not believe, and I've written this, and as Ajoy has also said, I do not believe in saying that we are in an emergency situation at the moment, although there are signs, obviously, and evidence of attempts to undermine some of the institutions of the country, and I needn't list those. So I don't believe we're in an emergency now, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight to strengthen the institutions of this country to prevent a further undermining of democracy. And the second thing I want to say is that Ajoy again talked about George Fernandez. Well, despite the fact that I say the institutions have failed, in every institution of the country, there were individuals who certainly did not fail. And we should always remember them with gratitude and with pride, I would say, as well. And I think in our own profession of Dayal Nair, for instance, an outstanding example of someone who stood for what he believed in. And so there were the great stories of heroism in the emergency. It wasn't all black, but it is something I hope will never occur again. And I think if it's not to occur again, we have to take care to strengthen the institutions of the country. Thank you very much.
Bali Nariman.
This is a very important function. Not merely because a book is released again,
published again and released. I don't know how many of you know that when L.K. Advani was Deputy Prime Minister and he was asked to release a book, he said, with great pleasure, because when I was in jail in preventive detention and when anybody said, release, so-and-so is released, we felt delighted. So, this is a very important moment for everybody. And I don't know how many of you saw all these, because Mark, I think, said, remembering people with pride, remembering people also with disgust. Yesterday, I don't know how many of you saw on television, Beyond, or that new channel, gathered some old photographs of the villains and the heroes and put them on television. Most interesting. But it was very interesting also to see them. It looked as if it was yesterday. But if you look at them now, if you look at me now, look at anybody, one of them now, L.K. Advani for instance, he looked buoyant. And so the importance of these events can never be gainsaid. And that's why it's very important. Just as people in England, and I wrote about this morning, say, remember the 5th of November, the Guy Fawkes Day. I thought it was in 1605. We must always remember the 26th of June. It's very, very important because we are, as they said, 1.5 generations away. People, the youngsters today don't know anything about it. They don't know what happened. They only have some rumors, somebody said something else. And they all said that Indira Gandhi was a murderer. That's all they know. But what's the use of all that? We are not talking about politically that one party is bad or one party is good, or who is good in one party and who is not good in one. In fact, the most important part is what did people do about it? And that's why this question of institutions becomes so relevant. What did we do about it? Members of Parliament got up and congratulated the Speaker, the Chairman, the Prime Minister, and said that we are so grateful that we can now pass all these bills without any opposition. There was only one poor fellow in opposition. That man was Chandrasekhar. I don't know if all of you know about this. He was the Young Turk. He was known as the Young Turk. We saw him on television yesterday. He has, poor fellow, not been given his due, to my mind, because he was a remarkable character. And he should, that is why it's important to have these images of people. We have to show them, not only speak about them, because people they haven't seen Vajpayee. What a tiger he was in his time. And of course I was very fortunate, I saw him in Parliament also. But I mean, it's tragic. Either they are all gone, they are all dead and gone, or they are half dying, like most of us are. But that's not the point. The point is that we have to remember the 5th of November, so we have to remember. We have to think about it, we have to talk about it, we have to see what the reaction of people was. Yesterday, one document came on television. I don't know if you saw this. It was a letter written by the Prime Minister to the President asking for dispensation of a prior cabinet meeting to declare the emergency. Very important. When someone said that it was illegal, I mean, yes, Mark said, and he's right, absolutely correct, unconstitutional. We started this unconstitutionally. And I've always said, because someone wrote at that point of time, I forget who, that the President, after he had signed the proclamation, took a pill, sleeping pill, and went to sleep soundly. I said, if he had done it before, I've always said that. That was the greatest disgraceful act that could ever be imagined. Babuji, the great Jagjivan, for whom I great regard and respect also, because he was an outstanding minister. Mrs. Gandhi asked him in the morning at the cabinet meeting after the emergency and said, what do you think about it? She asked him in India, of course. And he very wisely said, Madam, what can one say when you have already imposed it? See the man, nobody could fault him, no fault line. But you see, what did everybody do? That's the problem. What did the judges do? Somebody said I should say something about the judiciary. What happened then? Poor Kundip Nair, whom as you know was arrested and was to be preventive detention order was issued. But they fought for him. Two advocates, including Soli, my friend, Sorabji. They fought for him. They got him released. And what happened to the judges? Rangarajan, Justice Rangarajan of the Delhi High Court, very brave judge, very fine man also. He used to talk too much, of course, when he retired. But he was an outstanding human being and a very fine human being. Well, he was marched off as a transfer order, punitive transfer, to Assam. Unlike most other people who are treated so badly, he didn't resign. He went like a good soldier. And he was the most popular judge and then the Chief Justice of Assam. Extraordinarily popular with the bar and everybody, Rangaraj. What happened to the other fellow? That poor chap was a chap called Justice Agarwal. And he was only a High Court judge sitting with Rangarajan because he was a district judge who was being temporarily promoted. So he asked all the judges, and this is a true story, he asked all the judges of the Delhi High Court that should he go back, because he was asked to go back as a district judge. Poor fellow, he was a High Court judge, called my lord, and in the district you are called your honor. So that itself is a what So that poor fellow said, what shall I do? He asked all the judges. They all said, oh yes, yes. There's no problem at all. Some said resign, some said don't resign. There was a very independent and a brave judge, T.P.S. Chawla. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. T.P.S. Chawla is Dr. Chawla, who's living today, his brother. T.P.S. said, no use, all of you just saying all this to this poor fellow who wants advice. Here is my letter of resignation. He was a confirmed judge. He became Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court later. And he said, ask all the judges to sign this letter of resignation. And if resignation goes from 20 judges, government will take note of it, not if it goes from one. That's the spirit. And what happened? Only 2 judges signed. The rest said no, we don't want to sign. You see, that climate of fear comes in, of course it comes in. I was afraid also when I resigned, I very gratefully announced with a letter of resignation. And when I was the 3rd law officer of the union and as an additional solicitor general, I sent my letter from Bombay when my wife and I were in Bombay. We went to Bombay, but that's another story which I must tell you. We went before Krishna Iyer gave his verdict on Mrs. Gandhi's stay petition in the Supreme Court, which Palkiwala argued. When we were in a train, we said we'll go by train instead of plane this time. So we had a great Rajdhani address. We ordered chicken curry for dinner. Very pleased, and suddenly I read in the evening news was there that evening. There was no emergency that evening. And that said, on page 4 or page 5, that the Home Secretary had been transferred back to Rajasthan, and a new man comes in as Home Secretary. These were very troublesome times, you know, because Mrs. Gandhi's petition was to come up in 2 days before Krishna Iyer, the vacation judge. And I told my wife that this is very strange. Home secretaries are not fired just like that at times like these and so on. Anyway, then I read somewhere that during the French Revolution, the revolutionaries decided that all the bakeries shouldn't bake bread, you know, because for the French, bread is the staple food almost. But what they should do is get all the plows and make them into guns. So there was no bread in France for that way. And some very wise chap realized that here there is some mischief afoot. I wasn't wise, so I didn't realize that there was a mischief here afoot. Because the Home Secretary was purposely shifted, the new Home Secretary brought in order to carry out what the management wanted to do. And then came Krishna Iyer's judgment. And that was one of the brave acts of a judge. I always pulled his leg. He died at 99 or 100, as you remember. And said that you are responsible for the emergency, Judge, not Mrs. Gandhi. You gave the emergency because you didn't give her a complete stay. Which is true, absolutely true. She wouldn't have resigned. And he used to smile a bit and so on. But that is true. He was a brave man. He didn't give a damn. Palkiwala threatened him. Palkiwala, a professor of mine, a great friend. But he had appeared for Mrs. Gandhi. He was entitled to. He said, look, Judge, if you don't grant a stay, and that was reported in the paper, the whole country will be in revolution against the judiciary. Nothing happened, nothing of the kind, nothing happened. What happened to the Chief Justice? Chief Justice Ray. He, poor fellow, at a time when this was before the emergency, he was going into his court, the Supreme Court, when someone threw what looked like 5 big marbles at him into his car. He thought that they were hand grenades. They were nothing but exploded. He almost got a heart attack and he was confined to bed for 3 days. As a result of which, people like us benefited. I was the Additional Solicitor General, there was a Solicitor General, and there was the Attorney General. Each of us got a special fellow who was with a revolver to guard us. My wife cursed him because she had to feed the wretched fellow. But I tell you, this syndrome gets into you because this was, of course, a month or so before the emergency. And every evening when I went to walk, and those days we stayed behind Mrs. Gandhi at Saptarjung Lane. I used to walk at Nehru Park. He would come with me and so on. And after a while, I felt I needed that protection. What's the point of having a bodyguard if the chap doesn't come around and show himself a bit? I'm not joking. It gets into, the psyche gets into you. You begin to feel, oh, someone is definitely going to attack me unless I have a bodyguard with a gun. Nothing happened. Nobody attempted to take away the lives of the Attorney General or the Solicitor General or the Additional Solicitor General. But this is the syndrome that gets into us. And that we have to resist. But only in the capital all this is realized. If you're living in Bombay or Madras and all that, they don't understand all this. They never knew what would happen. And unfortunately, you see, the judges failed us. The Supreme Court failed us. And that is one of the unspoken things that have happened. And the most absurd thing is that the judgment in ADM Jabalpur, which is now famous or notorious, as you like it, Khanna delivered the famous dissent, which made Palkiwala write in the New York Times that his statue should be put on every corner of every street in Delhi. So, what happened? That these people just had no conception of how things are. And 4 of our senior most judges let us down. Khanna was a senior judge, but he didn't bother because he knew he'd lose his chief justiceship, and he lost his chief justice. They superseded him. And that's what happens in these trying times. You have to be very, very careful. never concede dictatorial power to any one person. I don't know how many of you saw or read Mr. Erdogan's re-election to office. The interview yesterday with our correspondent was, to me, frightening. He said, I don't know if all of you see it, it will probably come up again. He said, I am now the leader of the Muslim world. He's right. 87% of the vote of Turkey voted for him. He came into, and now he's got sweeping powers. He can dismiss anybody. Leave alone the Chief Justice, he can dismiss any member of Parliament, he can do anything to him. And that is a danger, my friends, that is a danger. No use talking about it because we won't be talking about it. I may not be alive, but even if I were alive, I wouldn't talk about it because who wants to go to jail? You don't. So what's the point of bragging about it? The point is, once you can talk about it, once you can think about it, please think very, very severely and very, very carefully of what can happen in any part of the world today, including and not excluding India. Thank you.
May I now ask the question, please?
Thank you, Ajoy, and thank you also for inviting me to this evening's function. I have taken note of the warning that you gave in your speech that it will be silly to compare the conditions today with the emergency of 1975. So I'm a little subdued by that warning. And in his foreword, Mark Tully also says that it cannot be compared, the two situations are different. But I am here to tell you that the danger is probably even greater than it was in 75, 77. And if we do not take note of these threats, and if we believe that things are not as bad as they were in 75, 77 because people have not gone to jail, the media has not been censored, and a whole lot of things have not happened, then we'll be making a grave error of judgment. Of course, after the amendment which was carried out 44th by the Janata Party government, imposition of emergency through the constitution in this country has become almost impossible. So there cannot be an emergency in this country under the Constitution of India as it prevails today. But what it has led to is merely a change in instruments of control. As far as the instruments of control in 75 are concerned, it was the political opponents being sent to jail, media censorship, and then certain byproducts like Nasbandi that you mentioned. But fear, as John said, stalked the land then. Fear stalks the land even today. And let's not underestimate that fear. Mark was talking about institutions of democracy. And we are all aware, because we are all thinking citizens of this country, we are all aware of the state in which the institutions of democracy exist today and how they have been compromised. And why isn't somebody raising his voice? Somebody is not raising his voice or her voice because they are scared. The entire investigative machinery of this government can be let loose against anyone who dares to oppose anything that this government is doing or wants to do. And nobody, and absolutely nobody is above this. Social media was referred to. Trolls. The way, and mind you, Sushma Swaraj is not alone in being trolled. We are all trolled. Shatrughan Sinha is trolled. I am trolled. I was in Srinagar the other day and I made some statement. And a fellow wrote in the social media that earlier he was taking money from the Congress party. Now he has started taking money from Pakistan. Freedom of speech. But the institutions of democracy, cabinet, because after all we have parliamentary democracy in this country. It's not presidential democracy, it's parliamentary system which prevails, where the cabinet is supposed to be taking collective decisions. What has happened to the cabinet? It's now well known that the finance minister of India did not know that demonetization decision had been taken until he was informed in a brief cabinet meeting. The Home Minister of India didn't seem to know that the BJP was going to withdraw support from the PDP government in Jammu and Kashmir, and that it lead to President's rule. And I have already said the third very important ministers, all of them members of the Cabinet Committee on Security, the External Affairs Minister. Look at her, what's happened to her. She's never taken by the Prime Minister on any of his trips abroad. And I can't imagine a situation when I was Minister for External Affairs that Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee will travel abroad and will not ask me to accompany him. So where are the ministers, the senior most ministers of this government? What are they doing? But nobody is raising a whimper about it. Why? Because they are all scared. They are all scared. The senior most ministers of this government have created a situation where the cabinet does not function on the basis of, or the government does not function on the basis of collective responsibility. And we'll say nothing has happened. No, no, no. It's not comparable to 1975. Parliament of India. In the last session, and why do these things go unnoticed, I don't know. In the last session of Parliament, many parties, as you are aware, moved motions of no confidence against the government. Day after day, the House will be disrupted. And the Honorable Speaker will say, I can't count 50 people. And therefore the House will be adjourned and the vote of no confidence will not be, motion of vote of no confidence will not be taken up. We let it pass. Nothing happened. Of course the government would not have lost. What were they running away from? They were running away from a discussion where members of the opposition would have had their say, and they did not want that say to take place, and therefore the House Lok Sabha was disrupted. Why does the Lok Sabha exist? I think the most primary responsibility of the Lok Sabha is to assure the people of this country that the government of the day has majority in Lok Sabha. That's the entire justification for a government. And here we have a situation where vote of no confidence is not allowed to be taken up. And I am warning you today, whenever the next Lok Sabha elections take place, and the president in his wisdom invites a political party or the leader of a political party and gives him 10 days or 15 days to prove his majority, which he does not have in the Lok Sabha. And the same thing happens in Lok Sabha. The same thing happens that on the day of the vote of confidence, disruptions take place and the vote of confidence is either passed by voice vote, entirely incorrectly, illegally, or the house is adjourned. Then it will meet after 6 months and you will have a minority government. Can you rule out that situation after the next election? But we let it pass. Parliament in any case is a much maligned institution in our democracy, and therefore nobody is bothered about the Parliament of India. Supreme Court, when the 4 senior most judges hold a press conference and say that benches are fixed, arranged is the word they used, this country goes into slumber again. When they say that we are here to warn you that democracy is in danger, we say no, democracy is not in danger, everything is hunky-dory, we are not bothered. They retire and go home. Election Commission, completely compromised. Reserve Bank of India, a hoary institution with its autonomy. The governor is called, asked to assemble his board of directors and pass a resolution supporting or recommending demonetization. Investigating agencies of the government I have already mentioned. Will any investigating agency of this government inquire into that cooperative bank scandal in Ahmedabad? How did they collect 750 crore rupees within 5 days? Will anyone take it up? Nobody will take it up. Lower courts pass most peculiar judgments. The Wire wrote a story about somebody's son, and immediately there was a judicial danda saying we can't talk about it. We say we are living in a democracy, there is freedom of speech. And finally the media. There is no censorship, Fali. There is no censorship. They are absolutely free, but they are absolutely free to sing praises of the government of the day. Only that and nothing more. They out-herald every evening. Whatever, it's not really advertisements. Somebody might be looking for a Rajya Sabha seat. Somebody might be looking for something else. But the media in this country is completely compromised. And except for one exception here or there, we all know how they are behaving. And not all of them are behaving in national interest, mind you. You just have to go to Srinagar. Any one of you, I am asking you, please visit Srinagar, where I was 2 days ago. And my God, those people are so angry at some of our channels day in and day out. They are abusing them, they are denigrating them, and all Kashmiris are terrorists. And the moment you say this is not true, you will be labeled an anti-national. The easiest thing today is to describe you as an anti-national person. And that's the final point which I'd like to make. And I'm not comparing the two situations of 75, 77 and today. But today, as I said, every institution of democracy is compromised. But what is the major difference between the 75 emergency and today's emergency, which makes it far more dangerous? And that major difference to my mind is that the emergency of 1975 was a political step. A certain situation had been created. Mrs. Gandhi thought she'll fight back by doing what she did. This undeclared emergency today has a huge element of communalism. You were talking about lynchings. This emergency is not entirely political. This emergency is communal emergency. And that is what makes it more pernicious. Because you can win people on the basis of communal hatred. Father Kuto is sitting here. The way he was trolled recently is well known. Where is the freedom of speech? The only freedom of speech which exists is if you speak in favor of the government, if you speak in praise of the government, then you have all the freedom. The moment you say something else, then you don't know what's going to hit you. So it is the communal land. Nothing brings it more prominently than what happened to Sushma Swaraj. What was her fault? But something, people are going to the extent of saying that she has an Islamic kidney. I mean, to what extent shall we go? So there are people who are thinking along those lines.
You have a Christian heart.
So, मित्रों, let me tell you at the end that the time to wake up is now. If we don't wake up and we think, it's somebody else's concern, then we are all in it for the worse and forget our individual losses. It's the country, this great country of India, with our great democracy, which will be the sufferer. So, we have released the book. We have been reminded about 1975, 77 and all the bad things that happened. Let's leave this hall with the resolution and the determination that we shall fight this undeclared emergency.